Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into something that literally touches almost all of our lives every single day. We're going to unpack the anatomy of a scroll, specifically diving into the massive short-form video boom right here in India. We'll be peeling back the layers on the data, the neuroscience, and even the behavioral economics behind what actually happens the second we pick up our phones. So let's get right into it.
Okay, be honest. Have you ever completely lost 40 minutes between a swipe and a scroll? Think about it. You're waiting for a cab or maybe just chilling on the couch right before dinner, and you open an app to watch just one quick video. Next thing you know, it's an hour later. We've all been there, right? It starts off so innocently, but as we're going to see today, that effortless, mindless scrolling, yeah, it's actually by brilliant, highly intentional design.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the sheer scale of the phenomenon. Over 500 million users in India are now consuming digital content. 500 million! And here's the kicker. They're doing it in their preferred regional languages. We're talking Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, you name it. Language just isn't a barrier anymore. It's this massive bridge. For brands and creators, pumping out localized, bite-sized video formats has turned out to be the absolute best way to reach people in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, completely blowing the English-first audience out of the water.
So, how exactly did we end up with this specific digital landscape? Let's quickly trace the timeline. Rewind to June 2020. Following border tensions, the Indian government put a geopolitical ban on TikTok. Now, at the time, TikTok had roughly 200 million users in the country. That is a massive overnight vacuum. But it definitely didn't kill the demand for short videos. Actually, it completely reshaped everything. Almost immediately, massive US-based platforms like Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, along with a bunch of domestic alternatives, aggressively swooped in to capture that highly localized, short-form video market. And they've dominated ever since.
Which brings us to Section 2, Rewiring the Brain, the neuroscience of the swipe.
Let's look at how this builds into the neurological impact of all those constant, tiny bursts of novelty. Because, what happens on your screen doesn't just stay on your screen. It literally changes how our brains operate. Every single time you swipe, you get something new and exciting. Clinicians call this reward pathway activation. Your brain just gets hammered with novelty, bright colors, and instant gratification, lighting up those reward pathways over and over. And the crucial takeaway here? This basically trains your brain to expect constant stimulation. So later, when things naturally slow down, like when you're trying to read a book, study, or just finish a boring work report, you hit a wall of boredom so much faster, simply because your brain is actively craving that rapid-fire algorithmic hit.
What's incredibly fascinating about this is an observation from Dr. Jyoti Mishra. She points out that, from a clinical perspective, the main concern isn't necessarily some sudden dramatic harm. It's actually these super subtle, gradual shifts in how the brain responds to everyday stimulation. Clinicians are noticing these shifts popping up as fatigue, restlessness, poor concentration, and even heightened anxiety. This is especially true for young adults, whose neural networks are basically being held in a constant state of alert by all this emotionally charged content.
Now, moving on to Section 3, the cost of scrolling, unpacking the Bahar academic study.
To really drill down into the internal, mental, and academic costs of all this digital saturation, let's take a look at the data. This particular study surveyed 450 college and university students between the ages of 17 and 25 across Bihar. It also had really strong female participation, coming in at nearly 57%. Now, these folks are the primary consumers of short-form video content, and they are right in the middle of a super critical stage in their academic and personal development.
And guys, the real-world impact here is pretty alarming. A whopping 52% of the surveyed students reported a significant reduction in their attention spans since they started regularly watching short videos. Another 34% noticed at least a slight change. Let that sink in. The vast majority are actively struggling to sustain their focus strictly as a direct consequence of their scrolling habits.
But it doesn't just mess with your academics and focus. The silent epidemic actually bleeds right into physical health. When we look at sleep quality, the numbers are just staggering. 45% say their sleep is significantly disrupted, and another 31% report moderate disruption. That is a massive 76% of users dealing with sleep issues. When you mix over 3 hours of viewing a day with late-night glow-in-the-dark scrolling, it's pretty obvious how deeply this impacts your overall holistic well-being.
Let's pivot to Section 4, the impulse buyer, the external cost on our wallets.
We've talked a lot about the internal, mental costs, but let's talk about money. We need to understand how the very architecture of the scroll is practically designed to fuel impulse buying. To get this, think about two totally different types of behavior. First, you have the traditional rational shopper. They take their time, right? They compare prices, they look at functionality, they make calculated economic decisions. But short-form videos completely bypass all of that to create the impulse buyer. This kind of behavior is driven by hedonic influence, which is basically just the pursuit of pleasure, mixed with curiosity, instant gratification, and a massive dose of FOMO, the fear of missing out. It yanks the consumer right out of rational thought and throws them straight into emotional, spontaneous purchases.
So, the secret sauce here is cracking the code of the algorithm using what marketers call the stimulus organism response framework. It goes like this. First, the stimulus. Bam! You get hit with this high-impact, super appealing, highly relatable influencer promotion in a 15-second video. Next is the organism. That's you. Well, what's happening inside your head? You start feeling emotional arousal, you build this parasocial trust towards the influencer, and that intense FOMO kicks in. And finally, the response, a completely frictionless transaction. These platforms make it so incredibly easy, with autofill payments and shoppable tags, that you literally buy the thing before your logical brain even has a chance to step in and say, wait a minute.
And does this framework actually work? Absolutely. It's wildly effective. A staggering 68% of young consumers actually admit to making an unplanned impulsive purchase right after watching a short video. The entire environment of the scroll is built to turn discovery into a transaction in a matter of seconds.
But there is a catch for the brands and creators pulling the strings here. It's a phenomenon called fluid inauthenticity. This kicks in when influencers lack a genuine connection with their audience, or they aren't transparent about who's sponsoring them. And young consumers? They are incredibly savvy. If they sniff out that inauthenticity, consumer trust just tanks. So to actually survive long-term in this space, micro-influencers absolutely have to avoid fluid inauthenticity. If they don't, they lose that crucial parasocial trust that drives all these impulse sales in the first place.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 5, Regaining Our Focus, Actionable Takeaways for Digital Wellness. Okay, so we've mapped out the crazy scale of this, the neuroscience, the academic toll, and those sneaky financial triggers. Now let's shift gears and talk solutions. What can we actually do to protect our wallets, our sleep, and our minds from this digital overload? Well, the research points to a few highly actionable steps. On a personal level, it all starts with practicing active digital hygiene. That means setting real time limits, intentionally taking breaks, and, this is a big one, keeping screens completely out of the bedroom to protect your sleep. On an institutional level, simply implementing device-free classrooms has been proven to boost academic performance. And looking at the bigger picture, researchers note that just slapping arbitrary bans on platforms doesn't really fix the root harms. What genuinely works is enacting comprehensive legislative privacy frameworks to hold these platforms accountable, alongside promoting critical digital literacy so we all know how to navigate these algorithms consciously.
I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. The design of the short video scroll is totally effortless. It pulls you in and does all the heavy lifting for you. But sustained attention, critical thinking, living intentionally, those things take actual work. Understanding the invisible machinery behind your screen is the very first step in taking back control. So, looking at all the data we unpacked in this explainer today, what will you choose to focus on tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me, and I can't wait to dive into our next topic together. Catch you then.
Welcome to